The late summer sun hung low over the Texas plains, bleeding amber light across endless stretches of grass and dust. The air was heavy with heat and silence, broken only by the faint rattle of cicadas and the whisper of wind weaving through dry mesquite branches. On the horizon, smoke from a distant homestead curled upward, the only sign of human life in a land both beautiful and brutal. This was the frontier, a place where fortunes could be made, but where survival itself often demanded the hardest bargains. Clara Dawson walked alone along a dirt road that wound toward the small town of Willow Creek. Her steps were slow, her boots worn thin, the hem of her dress frayed and clotted with dust. Her hands clutched a satchel that contained everything she owned: a Bible with torn pages, a bundle of baby clothes she had sewn in stolen moments, and a folded letter she had read so many times the ink had begun to fade. Her other hand rested on the swell of her stomach, round and heavy beneath the fabric. Each movement reminded her of the life growing within her, the child of an outlaw whose name struck fear in the region, and whose death had left her hunted and scorned. The world called her a widow, but not with sympathy. The outlaw's woman, they whispered in saloons. The cursed bride, muttered neighbors who once shared bread with her. Clara bore their words like stones pressed into her skin, unable to wash them off. She had not chosen her husband's crimes, nor had she benefited from him, yet guilt followed her as faithfully as her shadow. Now, with his death, she was more vulnerable than ever. The men he had betrayed, partners cheated, rivals robbed, believed she carried secrets, perhaps even the location of stolen money. They wanted answers. Some wanted vengeance, and Clara knew she could offer neither. As she neared Willow Creek, the town revealed itself in muted tones: weather-worn wooden storefronts, a livery stable with its doors yawning open, a church steeple poking into the pale sky. A group of ranch hands lounged outside the saloon, their laughter carrying across the street, sharp and careless. One of them noticed Clara approaching. His voice cut through the air. "Well, if it ain't the outlaw's widow," he jeered. "Town's safer with him gone. Shame she's still hanging around." The others chuckled, not cruelly, but indifferently, as though mocking her was no more unusual than spitting tobacco on the ground. Clara's jaw tightened. She kept walking, her eyes fixed ahead. She had grown used to such barbs, yet every word still sank deep, like a thorn she could not pull free. Inside the general store, she bartered for flour and dried beans, her coins counted carefully, every cent precious. The shopkeeper, Mr. Evers, took her money but avoided her gaze. His silence was harsher than insults. Clara carried her supplies outside, where the sun's glare made her blink. It was then she noticed him. Daniel Whitmore stood near his wagon, speaking with a ranch hand about supplies. His presence commanded quiet respect, not through arrogance, but through the quiet certainty of a man accustomed to responsibility. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hat shading eyes that had seen too much loss, yet refused to bend beneath it. Daniel was known in Willow Creek as the wealthiest rancher for miles, owner of fertile lands and hundreds of head of cattle. But behind the respect lay whispers of his own sorrow, a wife and child taken by raiders years ago, leaving him a solitary figure who poured himself into his land. For a moment, Clara thought he had not noticed her. Then his gaze shifted, meeting hers with steady calm. There was no scorn in his eyes, no judgment, only a quiet recognition, as though he saw the burden she carried and did not flinch. It startled her more than cruelty ever could. She lowered her gaze quickly, unwilling to accept kindness she feared might unravel her fragile defenses. Yet Daniel lingered, watching as she adjusted her satchel and pressed a hand against her back, her strength waning in the oppressive heat. Something stirred within him, a memory of grief, a recognition of survival in another's weary eyes. He almost spoke, but silence held him. Words, he knew, were fragile things, and Clara Dawson was a woman who had been cut too many times by careless tongues. Clara left the town square, heading toward the edge of Willow Creek, where she hoped to find a cheap room at the boarding house. But whispers trailed her steps. She overheard them, voices saying she would bring ruin, that danger followed her like a storm cloud. She did not deny it. In truth, she feared they were right. Her husband's enemies had not forgotten. Only last week, she had seen riders in the distance, their silhouettes dark against the sky, watching, waiting. She carried no map to hidden treasure, no secrets worth killing for, but men who smelled blood seldom cared for truth. As night crept closer, Clara found herself sitting outside the boarding house, staring at the horizon. The plain stretched endlessly, golden grass fading into violet twilight. She felt the child stir within her, a flutter of life that was both fragile and fierce. It filled her with a sudden ache, fear of failing, of leaving this innocent soul unprotected in a world so merciless. She thought of her husband's last words, spoken in a haze of blood. "Don't let them take what's mine." He had not meant her heart, nor her safety, only the spoils of his crimes. Clara had held his hand as he died, not from love anymore, but from the weight of duty. She had promised herself then that her child would not grow beneath the shadow of an outlaw's sins. The resolve hardened in her chest as the stars appeared one by one. She would keep moving, if she must. She would endure whispers and hunger, if that was the price. Yet the question loomed larger with each passing hour. How long could she keep outrunning danger, especially when her body slowed, heavy with new life? In the quiet, Clara lifted her eyes and saw a lone figure walking down the street toward the boarding house. The lamplight revealed Daniel Whitmore, his hat tipped low, his stride steady. He seemed out of place in the darkness, a man who belonged to the wide expanse of ranchland, not the narrow alleys of town. Yet he came closer, and for reasons she could not name. Clara felt her breath catch. Was he merely passing by? Or had his gaze earlier in the day meant more than she dared believe? Her heart pounded as she rose to her feet, torn between suspicion and a fragile spark of hope. Whatever his purpose, his arrival marked the beginning of something she could not yet name, but which would shape the course of her life in ways she never imagined. And as the night deepened around Willow Creek, Clara Dawson sensed that her long, lonely struggle was about to meet a force as unyielding as the land itself. The sun was high when Clara finally staggered into the dusty outskirts of Redstone Valley, her boots scuffed, her breath shallow, and her hand instinctively shielding the faint curve of her stomach. The journey had been merciless. Days of travel across rocky terrain, through ghostly canyons and silent stretches of prairie where only the cry of hawks pierced the air. Each step she took was guided not by choice but by necessity, the unrelenting drive of survival. She had lost everything, her outlaw husband, her security, her standing, and yet, somewhere within her lay the fragile spark of a new life she carried, and she could not afford to falter. Her entrance into town drew stares. The women paused from their chores, hands hovering over laundry lines or baskets of bread, their eyes scanning her torn hem and the smudges on her face. The men leaned against wooden posts, their whispers carried on the wind like thorns. In Redstone, stories traveled faster than stagecoaches, and Clara knew hers was already being told, each retelling making her shadow darker. The outlaw's widow. They called her. Trouble waiting to happen. But Clara had not come to seek pity or judgment. She had come to find shelter. What she hadn't expected was to find him. Levi Carter stood at the edge of the main street, watching her with a gaze that was neither hostile nor indulgent, but sharp, steady, and unreadable. He was not like the others who whispered in circles. His presence had weight, the kind of quiet authority that made men straighten their shoulders and children lower their voices. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-browned skin and hands marked by years of labor, Levi carried himself with the ease of someone who belonged to the land itself. He was a wealthy rancher, one of the largest landowners in the valley, but his reputation was built not on arrogance, but on fairness and discipline. When Clara's tired legs nearly gave way near the water trough, it was Levi who moved first. He crossed the distance with deliberate steps, his boots striking the ground in a rhythm that matched the steady pulse of the town itself. Without a word, he took her arm, steadying her as if he had been expecting her fall. Clara bristled at his touch, pride flaring up inside her like a defensive flame. Yet there was no judgment in his expression, only an unsaid question. "Will you allow yourself to be helped?" "I don't need saving," Clara whispered, her voice brittle, as though she were speaking as much to herself as to him. Levi did not flinch. Sometimes saving ain't a choice. It's survival, he replied, his tone even, yet carrying the weight of a truth she could not ignore. The townsfolk watched with sharp curiosity as Levi escorted her toward the shade of the general store's porch. A hush fell around them, broken only by the creak of wagon wheels and the soft shuffle of horses. Clara felt their eyes like needles, pricking her skin, stitching her past into the present. She wanted to shrink under their scrutiny, yet something about Levi's steady presence made her hold her head higher. Inside the general store, he brought her water, setting the glass on the counter without fuss. Clara drank slowly, every sip quenching more than her thirst. It calmed the storm inside her chest. Still, she could not ignore the obvious. This man, this stranger, was placing himself beside her when the whole town would rather turn away. "Why?" she asked, finally meeting his eyes. "Why offer kindness to me, of all people?" Levi's gaze did not waver. "Because I know what it means to lose. And I know what it means to have people decide who you are before you've spoken a word." His words landed like stones in a quiet pond, rippling through her heart. It was then Clara realized their paths were crossing not by accident, but by some cruel, necessary design. Her late husband had taken lives, stolen freedom, and left scars across the valley. She bore his name, his child, and the weight of his sins. Levi, too, bore scars. Though not visible, they were etched into his soul. Rumor spoke of a fire years back, one that had claimed his family's old homestead and left him alone to rebuild everything from ashes. If anyone understood the burden of ghosts, it was Levi. As the day waned, Clara found herself sitting across from him in the quiet back room of the store, the murmurs of the town muffled by wooden walls. He listened as she spoke haltingly about her flight, the danger that still lingered behind her, and the gnawing fear of raising her child alone. Every word she offered was measured, hesitant, as though speaking too much might strip away what little dignity she had left. Yet Levi listened without interruption, his silence carrying more comfort than pity ever could. "You can't stay here," he said at last, his voice low but certain. "The town won't let you rest. But I have land. I have room. If you need a place, I'll give it." The offer struck her like a thunderclap. It was not charity she sought, nor marriage, nor a new beginning she could claim without pain. And yet, here was this man, offering her not salvation but space, a chance to breathe, to live without the constant shadow of pursuit. Her instinct screamed caution. Accepting his offer would mean binding herself to another man, and after what she had endured, trust was a fragile thread she barely held on to. Still, the look in his eyes was not one of ownership, but of promise. He was not offering control but protection. For the first time since her husband's death, Clara felt the possibility of safety. Not peace, not yet, but safety. As dusk settled over Redstone, the decision pressed heavily on her. Levi stood at the doorway, the last rays of sunlight carving his figure into a silhouette of strength. Clara's heart pounded as she weighed her future. She had fled across barren lands, endured whispers that cut deeper than blades, and carried within her the life of a child not yet born. Could she risk believing in someone again? At last, her voice, quiet yet steady, broke the silence. "If I come, it will not be as someone needing saving. It will be as someone finding her way." Levi inclined his head, a faint flicker of respect crossing his face. "That's all I'd ask." And so, with the stars beginning to shimmer over Redstone Valley, the widow and the rancher stepped into a tentative alliance, one born out of romance or obligation, but of shared resilience. Neither of them knew what storms lay ahead, but for now, their paths had converged, and together they would face the whispers of a town, the shadows of the past, and the uncertain promise of tomorrow. The first days on Levi Carter's ranch were a strange blend of relief and unease for Clara. Relief, because for the first time in months she slept without the constant fear of hoofbeats chasing her down. Unease, because the ranch was a world she had never known, a place humming with men, animals, and the rhythms of work that seemed both foreign and demanding. Levi's home was not the grand house Clara had expected of a wealthy landowner. It was sturdy, functional, built more for endurance than for show. Wide porches overlooked the expanse of rolling pasture, where cattle grazed like specks against the horizon. The air was rich with the scent of dust, leather, and the faint sweetness of prairie grass. For Clara, who had spent years hiding in outlaw camps and shadowy taverns, this openness felt almost unbearable. Nothing here could be hidden. Everything lay exposed beneath the sky. The ranch hands greeted her with guarded curiosity. Some tipped their hats politely. Others avoided her eyes altogether. Whispers followed her as surely as they had in town. The outlaw's widow, the pregnant stranger. To them, she was trouble wrapped in a fragile frame, and perhaps, in their eyes, a threat to their employer's reputation. Levi noticed, of course. He had a way of observing quietly, of seeing more than people said. "Don't pay them no mind," he told Clara one evening, when she lingered too long on the porch, staring at the hands muttering by the corral. "They'll come around." But Clara doubted that. She had learned long ago that people rarely forgave what they thought they knew. Her real conflict, though, lay within herself. Each day she struggled with the tension of gratitude and pride. Levi had opened his land to her, offered her protection, and made no demands in return. And yet, every kindness he showed felt like a debt she had no way to repay. Worse still, she feared that accepting his shelter was slowly binding her to him in ways she could not name. Levi, for his part, carried his own battles. He had not expected her to be so fiercely independent, so determined to work despite her condition. On her second morning, he found her in the barn sweeping hay, her movements clumsy but stubborn. "You shouldn't be doing that," he said, his voice firm. Clara straightened, her hand brushing against the curve of her stomach. "I won't sit idle. I can pull my weight." Levi's jaw tightened. "You're carrying a child. That's work enough." The word struck her sharply, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it, with a quiet reverence that startled her. No man had ever spoken of her pregnancy as though it were sacred. Her late husband had seen it as an inconvenience, another tie binding him when he craved freedom. But Levi spoke as if her unborn child was a treasure, a future worth protecting. That night, Clara lay awake, wrestling with conflicting feelings. Part of her wanted to trust this man, to believe that his steadiness was real. But another part whispered caution, reminding her that she had trusted before and been left broken. She was torn between the instinct to flee and the need to stay. The conflict grew sharper when the sheriff came calling. Sheriff Dalton, a man with eyes like steel traps, rode up to the ranch one afternoon, dust trailing behind his horse. Clara froze when she saw him dismount, her hands instinctively protecting her belly. "Carter," the sheriff said, his voice clipped, "you've taken in the outlaw's widow. Do you know what that means for you?" Levi stood his ground, arms crossed. "It means I've given shelter to a woman who needed it. Nothing more." Dalton's eyes narrowed. "Her husband's enemies are still out there. You think they won't come looking? You're putting your land and your men at risk." Clara felt the weight of every word. She had known this confrontation would come, but hearing it aloud made her knees weak. Before she could speak, Levi's voice cut through the tension. "My land, my risk. She stays." The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then tipped his hat and rode off, leaving dust and silence in his wake. Clara stared at Levi, her chest tight, with conflicting emotions. Gratitude burned in her heart, but so did guilt. He was standing against the whole valley for her. What right did she have to ask that of him? That night, the air between them shifted. Clara found him on the porch, his gaze fixed on the distant stars. She sat beside him, the silence stretching between them like a taut rope. Finally, she whispered, "Why are you doing this? Why risk so much for me?" Levi didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low, almost vulnerable. "Because I see a woman who refuses to break, even when the world tries to shatter her. And because maybe I know what it's like to need someone to believe in you." The word struck deep, peeling away the walls Clara had built around her heart. She saw him not just as a rancher, but as a man marked by his own losses, his own battles with loneliness. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a fragile thread of understanding, woven from pain and resilience. Transformation came slowly, like dawn breaking after a long night. Clara began to trust Levi in small ways, allowing him to bring her meals, letting him steady her when she felt faint, sharing fragments of her past she had never told another soul. In turn, Levi softened, his stoic exterior giving way to glimpses of warmth and quiet humor. Yet, for every step toward trust, shadows lingered. One evening, a gunshot echoed in the distance, sending Clara's heart racing. Bandits, perhaps, or men who still bore grudges against her late husband. Fear surged through her veins, reminding her that her past was not so easily escaped. Levi found her trembling in the barn, and without hesitation, he pulled her close, his arms a fortress around her. "You're safe here," he whispered. And though the words were simple, they carried a power she could not deny. By the end of that week, Clara realized something had shifted within her. Where once she had seen herself as nothing more than a hunted widow, now she began to glimpse another possibility, a woman who could survive, who could protect her child, and who, perhaps, could learn to trust again. The conflict between fear and hope had not vanished. It would never vanish entirely. But slowly, in Levi's presence, she was being transformed. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, the unspoken truth hung in the air like the scent of rain before a storm. Their fates were now bound together, for better or worse. The night was heavy with stillness, the kind that presses down on the land like a warning. Crickets sang in the tall grass, the cattle shifted uneasily in their pens, and the moon, half hidden behind drifting clouds, cast long, broken shadows across the ranch. Clara sat near the window of her small room, her hands resting protectively over the swell of her stomach. She could not shake the unease gnawing at her chest. Something was coming. She had felt it all day, an unspoken tension that even Levi could not mask. His movements had been sharper, his glances toward the horizon longer. The sheriff's warning still echoed in Clara's ears. Her husband's enemies are still out there. And then the sound came, hoofbeats, faint at first, then multiplying, growing into a thunderous rhythm that made the very earth tremble. Clara's breath caught. She rose quickly, gripping the edge of the window. In the distance, torches flared against the night, weaving through the darkness like fireflies. They had come. The ranch hands scrambled to action, shouts ringing out as men rushed to secure the gates and arm themselves. Levi's voice cut through the chaos, calm but commanding, steadying his men like a captain steering through a storm. Clara watched him stride into the yard, lantern light glinting off his broad shoulders, his presence alone enough to anchor those around him. But the sight of the riders cresting the hill froze her blood. These were no strangers. She recognized their silhouettes, their rough movements, the way they carried their rifles slung loose, as though violence were second nature. They were her husband's old companions, men who had once shared campfires and stolen spoils with him, men who had mocked her, threatened her, and in their eyes, branded her as nothing more than the cursed wife of a reckless outlaw. The leader, a wiry man with a scar slicing across his cheek, called out, "Carter, we know you've got her. Hand over the widow, and we'll leave your ranch standing. Refuse, and we'll burn it to ash." Clara's knees weakened. For a moment, she considered slipping away, surrendering herself to save the ranch and the men who worked it. But then she felt a faint kick within her belly, a reminder that she was not alone, that surrender meant more than just her own fate. Levi stepped forward, his voice carrying across the night. "She's under my protection. If you want her, you'll have to go through me." A murmur rippled through the gathered hands. To defy armed outlaws so openly was madness, but Levi's resolve was unshakable. Clara could see it in the set of his jaw, in the calm steadiness of his stance. He would not bend. Not tonight. The standoff stretched into silence. Then, with a curse, the scarred man raised his hand, and gunfire shattered the night. The battle erupted in a storm of smoke and sound. Bullets ripped through the air, torches arced, and the scent of gunpowder mingled with the acrid tang of burning wood. Ranch hands fired from the cover of fences and barns, their shouts drowned by the roar of horses and the crack of rifles. Clara crouched low in her room, torn between terror and the instinct to fight. She grabbed the small revolver Levi had pressed into her hands days before, its weight unfamiliar but necessary. Each shot outside was a reminder that men were risking their lives because of her. Suddenly, the door burst open. One of the bandits had slipped past the defenses, his face twisted in a sneer. "There you are, witch," he hissed, raising his weapon. Time slowed. Clara's heart thundered as she raised her revolver. Her hands trembled, but she pulled the trigger. The gun roared, and the man staggered, falling backward into the dirt. She dropped the weapon, her chest heaving, horror and relief warring within her. She had defended herself and her child for the first time. Outside, Levi fought with relentless focus. He moved with precision, his rifle steady, his voice rallying his men even as bullets tore through the night. Yet, beneath his control, a deeper fire burned. He was not just defending his land. He was defending Clara, the woman whose strength had quietly reshaped him. At last, as dawn's first light crept over the horizon, the outlaws broke. Wounded, defeated, they retreated into the hills, their torches snuffed, their threats fading into the distance. Silence fell over the ranch, broken only by the groans of the injured and the ragged breaths of the living. Clara stumbled into the yard, her face pale but determined. Levi turned to her, his shirt torn, his arms streaked with blood. For a moment, the chaos faded, and all she saw was him, standing firm, unyielding, yet softened by the relief in his eyes when he saw she was safe. "You're hurt," she whispered, moving toward him. "It's nothing," he replied, though his voice was hoarse. His gaze dropped to her trembling hands, still faintly smudged with gunpowder. "You defended yourself." Clara nodded, tears stinging her eyes. "I couldn't let them take me. Not anymore." In that instant, the revelation came, not as a shout, but as a quiet truth between them. Clara was no longer the hunted widow defined by her past. She had found her strength, her will to fight for her child and her future. And Levi was no longer just the protector, the stoic rancher who offered shelter. He was the man who had risked everything, not because of duty, but because he believed in her. Their eyes met, and though no words were spoken, the bond between them deepened into something unbreakable. The ranch had survived, but both of them knew the greater victory was within. Clara had confronted her fears and taken her first step into the life she had once thought impossible. Levi had revealed the depth of his heart, proving that love could be as steady and fierce as any defense. And though danger might rise again, they now stood together, not as protector and protected, but as equals bound by trust, courage, and something far stronger than fear. The first morning after the battle dawned in hushed tones. The sky stretched wide and soft above the ranch, brushed in gentle hues of lavender and gold, as if nature itself sought to soothe the scars of the night before. Smoke still curled faintly from a scorched barn door, and bullet holes marred the fences, but the land was alive. Cattle lowed, horses stamped, and men moved slowly about with bandaged arms and weary faces. Life was pressing forward. Clara stepped out of the house, her shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders, her hand resting instinctively on the curve of her belly. For the first time in weeks, she did not feel the instinct to hide or shrink from the day. Instead, she breathed deeply, inhaling the mingled scents of ash, earth, and morning dew. Survival had a fragrance of its own. Levi stood near the corral, speaking quietly with two of his ranch hands. His movements were deliberate but slower, his arm bound tightly from a wound taken in the fight. Yet even injured, his presence radiated assurance. When his eyes lifted and met Clara's across the yard, the fatigue in his expression softened into something warmer, something only meant for her. She walked toward him, each step steady despite the tremors still echoing inside her. "The men say the outlaws won't return," Levi told her, his voice low and even. "They've been scattered, and if they do, they'll find we're ready." Clara nodded, though she knew the scars left behind were not just on wood and stone. The men would carry the memory of fear, the knowledge of how close ruin had come. She herself would carry it too, but she would also carry something more powerful. She had looked into the eyes of her past tormentors and refused to surrender. "Levi," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I can't thank you enough. You gave me shelter when no one else would. You risked your life to defend me. But it wasn't just you who saved me. He studied her carefully, waiting. She took a breath, her hands clasping before her. Last night, I realized something. I'm not the cursed woman they whisper about in town. I'm not just an outlaw's widow. I'm someone who can fight, someone who can stand. I thought I was broken, but I'm not. And I never want to live like I'm waiting to be hunted again. For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the shifting of the horses in the corral. Then Levi stepped closer, his gaze steady, his voice carrying a softness she had seldom heard from him. I knew it from the moment I saw you. Not a curse, Clara. A survivor, stronger than you believe, and worth more than you've ever been told. Her throat tightened. Tears pricked her eyes, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. In the days that followed, the ranch slowly returned to its rhythm. Fences were mended, livestock tended, and laughter, though quiet at first, began to filter back into the air. Clara joined in the work where she could, helping in the kitchen, mending clothes, and offering a hand with the children of the ranch hands. Her presence, once seen as a burden, became a source of quiet inspiration. She was no longer just a guest. She was part of the ranch's heartbeat. One afternoon, Levi found her sitting beneath the cottonwood tree near the edge of the property, a letter in her lap. It was the last one her husband had written, crumpled and worn from weeks of handling. Clara looked up as Levi approached. "I've read it 100 times," she admitted softly. "It's filled with empty promises and excuses. I thought it was all I had left to hold on to, but now it feels like a weight I don't need anymore." Without another word, Levi sat beside her. Clara held the letter over a small flame from the lantern she had brought, watching as the edges curled and blackened, the words dissolving into smoke. She released it, and the ashes drifted away on the wind. A chapter closed, not erased, but transformed into memory. Levi didn't speak, but his hand brushed against hers, firm and grounding. She looked at him, and for the first time, allowed herself to smile without fear. The townsfolk soon heard of the attack on the ranch, of how the widow had not cowered but defended herself, and how the rancher had stood firm beside her. Whispers began to change their shape. No longer was she spoken of only as the cursed woman. Some still clung to their cruelty, but others now called her brave. Some even admired her. Respect, once unimaginable, began to take root. As weeks turned into months, Clara's belly grew, and with it, the quiet bond between her and Levi deepened. He never rushed her, never pressed her, but his steady presence became the anchor of her days. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in flames of crimson and gold, Levi took her hand. "Clara," he said gently, "you don't have to walk this road alone. Not anymore. If you'll let me, I'd be proud to give you my name, not because you need it, but because I want to share the weight of tomorrow with you." Her heart ached with the simplicity of his offer. Not salvation, not pity, partnership, choice. Tears welled in her eyes, and she nodded, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Levi, yes." The moral of their story did not rest solely in survival, nor even in love, but in the transformation of identity. Clara had learned that she was not defined by the shadows of her past or the cruelty of others. She was defined by her courage to face fear, her will to protect her child, and her openness to trust again. Levi, in turn, embodied the truth that strength is not in dominance, but in steadfast loyalty, compassion, and the willingness to stand beside someone when the world turns away. The ranch, once just a refuge, became a place of rebirth, and under the endless skies of the West, Clara found not just safety, but a future she never thought possible, a future carved not from whispers of curses, but from the promise of resilience, hope, and love. The sun slipped beyond the horizon, leaving streaks of light across the plains, and in that quiet moment, as the world settled into night, Clara finally felt at peace.